The first frame didn't look like much. A smear of bright white against the solar background, wrapped in the usual static and distortion you expect from anything that drifts too close to the sun's glare. But the astronomer who leaked it said something simple, almost quiet, before posting it anonymously. Comets don't fire toward the sun. That was the moment people realised what they were seeing. A plume, a burst. Before we go further, if you're fascinated by this unfolding mystery, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time this story reached you, because by the time we finish, time itself might not feel the same. Now, a narrow, needle-like spray of high-energy material shooting from the sunward side of 3I Atlas. Not a tail being blown away by radiation pressure, but something pushing against the sun itself. It shouldn't exist. It shouldn't be possible. And yet, there it was. At first, the observatory tried to sanitize the language. They called it a sunward jet event, a phrase that only appears in academic literature as a hypothetical footnote, something that could happen under extreme stress, with volatile ices superheating and erupting in bizarre directions. But this plume wasn't chaotic. It wasn't multi-angled. It wasn't diffused. It was straight, clean, aligned within 2 degrees of perfect orientation. Nature doesn't do precision like that. That's what made the image so dangerous, because the moment you accept that the plume is real, is the moment you must confront what it implies. Something on 3I Atlas fired. And if something fired, it means the object is not drifting through our solar system. It's operating, it's adjusting, it's acting. Scientists tried to hold the line. They layered the explanation with technical terms: thermal jets, cryovolcanic conduits, localized albedo variants. But as the enhanced image spread across private channels, as independent labs sharpened the structure pixel by pixel, one truth quietly erased every comforting hypothesis. This wasn't outgassing. It was exhaust, and exhaust, unlike gas eruptions, is engineered. Even the timing was suspicious. Atlas had just passed perihelion, its closest point to the sun, where instruments lose clarity, where telemetry glitches, where agencies have the perfect excuse for gaps in data. Yet somehow, through the curtain of solar interference, a single observatory caught the plume in its brightest moment. The leak didn't just reveal the event, it revealed the cover. Because hours later, NASA pulled 3 scheduled data releases. ESA went silent, and one of the private monitoring networks updated their system logs with a phrase they had never used before: outbound vector discrepancy detected. It meant the object's trajectory changed, something corrected its course, and now that change is dragging 3I Atlas into a path no one had predicted, a path that leads deeper into the inner system, not out of it. But before we talk about that, let's return to the plume itself, because the strange part isn't just the direction, it's the heat. Infrared overlays showed temperatures far above sublimation thresholds, hotter than any known comet jet, more like plasma discharge, more like controlled expulsion, more like the signature of an engine regulating thrust under extreme gravitational load. And yet the object didn't brighten in the way comets do after an eruption. There was no debris cloud, no fragmentation, no rolling plume expanding through space, just a thin directed burn, and absolute silence afterward, as though the object had done something precise, something intentional, and then shut itself back into dormancy. But the sun noticed. Solar wind models picked up a sudden compression wave moving outward from the direction of the plume, a pocket of disturbed particles shaped like the wake behind a boat keel. Not from collision, not from scattering, from resistance. A natural body can't push against the solar wind, but a powered one can. That's where the internal emails began, short, uneasy, written by people who measure orbital mechanics for a living. We're observing non-gravitational acceleration. Repeat, non-gravitational. The last time those words were used in a serious publication was in reference to Oumuamua, and even then scientists refused to admit what many suspected. But with 3I Atlas, the evidence is no longer subtle, not ambiguous, not deniable. It's direct. The plume is a maneuver, and that means the object is not a comet, it's a vehicle, or worse, a probe that doesn't want to be predictable. The question now is simple. Where is it going? Because after the plume event, its new trajectory is no longer leaving the solar system. It's descending, not toward Earth, not toward Mars, but toward a region of space where sunlight thins, radiation quiets, and shadows grow long. A place where a maneuvering object could hide. You may think that's speculation, but the data says otherwise. For the first time, two independent orbital solvers, one in California, one in Budapest, published the same conclusion. Atlas is entering a transfer arc consistent with controlled flight. And today, a second image leaked. The plume wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an anomaly. It was the first signal. The object is doing something, and for the first time since entering our solar system, it's doing it openly. The second leaked frame came from a telescope that shouldn't have been pointed anywhere near the sun. Its detectors aren't built for that kind of exposure, but according to the anonymous note attached, the observatory had been told, quietly, to maintain focus on interstellar object 2025-M7 during perihelion, regardless of glare interference. That phrasing alone was unusual. Objects like 3i Atlas don't receive phrases like regardless of glare interference. That's language reserved for targets the agency refuses to lose track of. Targets that matter. And when the enhanced image landed in private scientific circles, the reaction was immediate. Unlike the first frame, where the plume was faint and partially obscured, this second image caught the moment exactly mid-burn. A bright line of superheated particles shot outward from the sunward face, crisp and defined, forming a radiant needle right against the darkest part of the solar corona. But in this new frame, something else appeared. Something no one saw in the first leak. A shadow. A thin, curved silhouette behind the main body of the object, almost like a ring or an arc. Not attached, not orbiting, just present. Trailing. Scientists zoomed in, enhanced, reprocessed. And each time the structure's outline became clearer. A faint semicircular halo of material that wasn't behaving like dust or gas. It wasn't drifting. It wasn't dispersing. It was following, as if tethered. And that's when someone wrote the sentence that sent a quiet chill through every encrypted chat the image passed through. This isn't a plume, it's a reaction stage. Not a jet, not a vent, a stage. Something detachable, something meant to burn briefly and fall away. Which raises the question, why would an interstellar object carry a reaction stage? Unless it wasn't meant to take long trips. Unless it was designed for shorter, tactical maneuvers, adjustments, insertions, repositioning within a system, unless it expected to move inside solar systems, not between them. That possibility changes everything. The more researchers examined the second image, the clearer the implication became. The plume wasn't simply correcting trajectory, it was altering orientation, pivoting Atlas just enough to realign its rotation axis. Rotating toward something. But toward what? That's where the timing becomes important. Because the moment after the plume event, right when the object stabilized from the burn, solar monitors picked up a brief razor-thin flash of electromagnetic interference. Bright, coherent, structured. A pulse. Not random solar noise, not the crackling aftermath of heat. Something clean. A signal. It lasted just 0.4 seconds and was measured at a frequency right between two natural solar harmonics, a place where nothing should comfortably exist. Something created it. Something timed it. Something used the moment of plume ignition to send out a signal that blended perfectly with solar turbulence. People inside the ESA control room called it a whisper inside a hurricane. Barely detectable, almost intentional, but intentional to whom? Because minutes after the pulse, probes orbiting near Mercury recorded something even stranger. The solar wind bent, not dramatically, not violently, but subtly, like a wave diverting around a submerged object. Except there was nothing there, no asteroid, no dust cloud, no magnetic anomaly. Unless, of course, something was there, something the sun reacted to. And that leads into the quiet conclusion that more and more astronomers are reaching, though no one dares to publish it. The plume wasn't for propulsion, it was for signalling. A message fired directly into the face of the sun, knowing the solar wind would carry the residue of the burn outward across the system, like ink diffusing through water. And something out there responded. Privately, several deep space arrays reported receiving a faint echo, barely a whisper, coming from a direction just outside the ecliptic, too faint to triangulate. They classify it not as a message but as an asymmetric return, like sonar, like 3i Atlas pinged the solar environment, and something pinged back. One researcher, speaking anonymously, described it this way. We're observing a two-node communication chain. One node is Atlas, the second, unknown. If that's true, the plume wasn't a maneuver at all. It was the flash of a lighthouse, a flare, a beacon, and the burn pointed toward the sun because the sun isn't an obstacle, it's a carrier, the perfect amplifier. A cosmic broadcast tower radiating the signal through the entire heliosphere, which means the object might not be here looking for something, it might be here meeting something. Ever since Atlas entered the inner system, scientists have quietly wondered why it angled itself into a trajectory that hugs the sun so tightly, far closer than it needed to for a gravitational assist. Too close. Recklessly close. Unless the close pass wasn't for propulsion. It was for contact. Solar physicists now suspect that the plume event was timed precisely at the lowest point of solar activity during Atlas's perihelion pass, just when the sun's chaotic magnetic field drops briefly into a more predictable form. Why would that matter? Because a stable field makes a cleaner line for transmission. Less noise, less interference, a clear channel. And the burn aimed at the sun wasn't the object fighting gravity. It was the object using the sun, not as a force, as an antenna. The sun became part of the signal, which raises a final question, one that no agency has addressed. If Atlas just used a solar pulse to contact something, and that something responded, then where exactly is Atlas going now? Its new trajectory is no longer random, no longer drifting, no longer predictable. It is headed toward a single narrow band of space, a region where sunlight fades, where shadows gather, and where instruments struggle to see. A place where something could wait, quietly, patiently, for years, maybe centuries. And if this object isn't alone, then the plume pointed at the sun was not an accident. It was a signal home. The new trajectory wasn't discovered by NASA. It wasn't discovered by ESA. It wasn't even discovered by the Big Survey, telescopes that track near-Earth objects like beads on a string. Instead, it came from a graduate student in northern Chile who was writing code to remove solar interference from images. Routine work, nothing dramatic. But when he ran his algorithm on Atlas's post-perihelion coordinates, he noticed something that stopped him cold. The outbound path wasn't a curve, it was a line, a perfectly straight line, cutting clean through the region beyond Mars, missing Earth by a comfortable distance but pointing toward a single, narrow slice of space with eerie precision. Not a scatter, not an arc, not a natural drift curve shaped by gravity. A vector. Objects don't leave the sun on vectors. They spiral, they curve, they wobble under solar wind pressure. Atlas wasn't wobbling. Its new course was cleaner than any comet ever recorded. He tried the data again, and again, and again. The result didn't change. When he sent the findings to his advisor, the reply came back 12 minutes later, short, clipped, tense. Don't share this publicly, sending to ESA. Within hours, the data vanished from the server. What replaced it was an updated trajectory from official channels, completely different. Rounder, messier, more natural, almost like someone had drawn in a wiggle to make it look like a comet again. But the student had already saved the original, and when independent orbital modelers ran the numbers using raw starfield positions, they all reached the same conclusion. The original trajectory was real. 3i Atlas wasn't leaving the solar system. It was going deeper. But deeper where? That's where the anxiety quietly spreads across the scientific community, because Atlas's new path aligns almost too perfectly with something astronomers rarely talk about, a dead zone. A region between Mars and Jupiter where sunlight thins, dust clouds thicken, and objects drift for decades without observation. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's invisible, just dark enough, just quiet enough, that small bodies vanish into the static. If you wanted to hide something, that's where you'd put it. And that's what terrified the people who ran the models. Because when they projected Atlas's future path beyond the interference noise, past the solar wind disturbances around the plume event, the line pointed to one specific location. A Lagrange shadow. A gravitational pocket where objects can remain stable for centuries. A meeting point. Or a storage yard. Or a waiting zone. Now imagine something sitting there. Motionless. Cold. Dormant for thousands of years. completely invisible from Earth, waiting for a signal, waiting for a spark, waiting for a burn, waiting for Atlas. Because the last time a plume this clean and directional was seen, it wasn't on a comet at all. It was on Voyager, firing its thrusters to correct orientation after decades in deep space. And that comparison, just a quiet comment on an internal message, bored, was enough to make several astronomers stop posting entirely. Because if 3i Atlas is firing thrusters, then someone built them. And if the exhaust pointed at the sun was a signal, then someone built the receiver. That knowledge sits like a weight in the room at every observatory now. Not panic, not fear, just an unsettling sense that something enormous is brushing against the edges of human understanding, gently, subtly, as if trying not to wake us too soon. There's a reason the agencies won't publish the raw frames. And it's not because they're hiding evidence of aliens. It's something quieter, something more unnerving. They're hiding something they don't yet understand. Because when researchers examined the shape of the plume, its density, its curve, the pattern of its dispersion, they found something almost elegant about it. A symmetry, a rhythm. As if the exhaust wasn't a random blast of material but a patterned sequence. Like the pulse of a heart or the beat of a sensor. A fingerprint. And hidden within that fingerprint, encoded in the brightness variations, was a repeating interval. 3 pulses, then a pause. 3 pulses, then a pause. A sequence identical to one detected weeks earlier in the radio reflections from Atlas's surface. Not from the object, from the sunlight bouncing off it. As if its surface wasn't reflecting light randomly, it was shaping the reflections. One astronomer described it in simple words. It's not sending data, it's announcing presence. And that's why some believe the plume aimed at the sun wasn't about propulsion or communication at all. It was identification. A beacon fired into the hypercharged electromagnetic field of the sun, knowing that every corner of the system would hear the signature carried in the solar wind. A cosmic handshake, a message saying, "I'm here, I've arrived, begin phase 2. The more conservative researchers argue that this is paranoia, that humans are reading too much intention into coincidence. But even they can't deny the last observation logged before Atlas disappeared into solar glare. Its rotation slowed, not naturally, not gradually, but abruptly, as if stabilizing, preparing, aiming. Comets don't strafe, comets don't align, comets don't slow rotation to target precision, but rockets do. And that's the thought that keeps returning to every scientist who has seen the leaked images. Not that Atlas is a ship, not that Atlas is a probe, but that Atlas is doing something that requires orientation, something that demands exact geometry, something that needed to be perfectly aligned with the sun before the plume fired. Because if the sun wasn't the target, it was the trigger, and now the trigger has been pulled. The first monitoring stations to notice the next anomaly weren't tracking 3i Atlas at all. They were watching the sun. And what they saw was so subtle, so near the baseline of normal solar variation that it would have been dismissed if not for the timing. 8 minutes after the plume fired toward the sun, the exact amount of time it takes for light and charged particles to reach Earth, the solar magnetic field hiccuped. Not a flare, not a coronal event, not a sunspot rotation or a filament rupture. A hiccup, a tiny momentary stutter in the sun's rhythm. The sun has patterns, like breathing, like the pulse of a living thing. And for just half a second, that pulse skipped. Every instrument measuring it reported the same anomaly. A vertical dip in the magnetic signature, clean and straight, as though something had passed through the sun's outer layers, leaving a perfectly carved indentation in the data. Solar physicists argued immediately. Some said it was an instrument glitch. Some insisted it was a calibration error. Some claimed it was a cosmic ray hit. But the shape was wrong for all three. It wasn't noise, it wasn't distortion, it was a signature, almost like the sun absorbed the plume, processed it, then reacted. Here's the part that never made it to the public reports. When physicists tried to model the magnetic dip, the simulations wouldn't converge unless something else, some independent oscillation, was added to the system. A second frequency, a second heartbeat, as if something resonant struck the sun and the sun answered back. One researcher quietly wrote in his notes, "This wasn't a solar reaction, this was a handshake." Nobody wanted to believe that. But the data refused to become anything else. And then, the outbound solar wind changed. You wouldn't notice it unless you stared at solar telemetry every day, comparing graphs hour to hour, watching the chaotic tide of charged particles wash across the heliosphere. But the watchers, the real watchers, saw it. The solar wind carried a ripple, a repeating ripple, a distributed wave flowing outward through space with perfectly timed spacing, moving like the quiet echo of something that passed through the sun and altered the outgoing stream. This shouldn't be possible. The sun shouldn't transmit information. Solar wind shouldn't carry encoded structure. And yet, it did. As if the plume gave the sun a message, and the sun repeated it. Earth's magnetosphere caught the ripple 13 hours later. It didn't shake the planet. It didn't cause storms, but atmospheric sensors detected a vibration, an electromagnetic hum, far too uniform to be natural. A single, stable tone. Low, smooth, unbroken, and it matched the frequency of the plume. The planet felt it. People felt it without knowing what they felt. A moment of sudden quiet, a flash of dizziness, a sense that gravity had shifted by a hair. Birds lifted into the air at random. Dogs stopped barking mid-breath. Security cameras around the world captured a strange phenomenon. For a fraction of a second, shadows disappeared. Everything went soft, diffuse, as though the sky itself brightened in every direction at once, and then, just as quickly as it came, the sensation faded. No alarm, no aftershock, just a quiet ripple through the atmosphere, like the exhale of a giant. At that exact moment, the last deep space probe with line of sight to Atlas recorded a small but unmistakable event. A flash, not bright, not dramatic. A pinhole bloom of light right along the object's solar-facing axis. Atlas wasn't finished. Something had activated. The plume wasn't the burn, it was the prerequisite. Engineers who studied the probe's telemetry described the flash in a single sentence. It looks like initialization. Atlas had powered something on, and the timing, the precision, the symmetry with the solar ripple was too perfect to ignore. But the most chilling detail came next. Atlas emitted a burst of microwave radiation, directed, narrow, targeted, straight into the region of space it was now heading toward. Not random, not chaotic. A ping. One astronomer called it the first deliberate emission from an interstellar object. Another called it a call. But the third, the one who had been silent through the entire analysis, looked at the narrow beam transmission and said, "No, that's not a call. That's a response." Suddenly, every earlier assumption collapsed. Atlas wasn't contacting something for the first time. It was answering something that had already called it, and that implied a far more unsettling truth. Whatever waits in the shadowed region of space beyond Mars didn't need coordinates. It already knew where Atlas was. Atlas was the one catching up. The plume wasn't a searchlight. It was a course correction, a homing maneuver, because the thing out there had already signaled first, and Atlas was returning the signal to begin final approach. Now that scientists knew where Atlas was heading, they pointed every available telescope at the region, dozens of scopes, thousands of hours of observation. They found nothing. A perfect void. No asteroids, no dust trails, no infrared, no radio, nothing. But that nothingness was wrong. Too still, too empty, almost artificial. One researcher finally put the fear into words. If something has been there long enough, the solar system may have grown around it. Meaning, it could be ancient, it could be dormant, it could be waiting. And the plume fired at the sun was the signal that the waiting is over. 3 days after the plume event, the first anomaly appeared in the asteroid belt, not in the region where Atlas was headed, but far closer to Earth. A fragment, small, unremarkable, shifted. Just a little. Just enough for automated tracking systems to flag it. Space rocks drift all the time, but they don't jump. This one jumped. Only a few meters, but instantly, and without collision. It shouldn't have meant anything. It was too small, too irrelevant. But the data review teams inside NASA's Planetary Defense Office caught another shift, then another. Tiny, intermittent, but patterned. As if something were moving through the belt, something not visible, creating disturbances in its wake, like the passing of a silent wave, or gravity being nudged, or space being reshaped. By the time they triangulated the subtle movements, a path emerged, a line, faint but real, connecting the disturbances like dots in a constellation. The line pointed directly to the region Atlas was heading toward. That was the moment the phrase leading object first appeared in the internal messages. If Atlas was responding to a signal, something must have transmitted it. And if something transmitted it, there had to be a source. But what if the source was moving? The shifts in the asteroid belt weren't random. They matched the timing of the solar wind ripple. Whatever caused the ripple might not have been stationary. It might have been travelling through the system long before Atlas arrived, quietly, slowly, avoiding detection by slipping through regions too dark and too noisy for normal sensors. Not a ship, necessarily. Not a probe, but a presence. Something that doesn't emit light, doesn't reflect, doesn't scatter. Something that only reveals itself indirectly, through faint distortions of the world around it. The kind of presence that would be invisible, unless you already knew it was there. When the data analysts plotted the positions of all disturbances recorded across 20 years of asteroid belt observations, tiny, forgotten anomalies, they discovered something stunning. The pattern existed long before Atlas entered the solar system, like the shadow of an object moving silently through the belt for decades, waiting for what? For whom? The next clue came from Jupiter's magnetosphere. A probe orbiting the gas giant recorded a sudden lull, an unnatural smoothing of the planet's chaotic magnetic field, like a hand sliding across rough fabric. It lasted only a moment, but the signature matched the solar ripple, a harmonic echo, quietly threading itself through Jupiter's enormous field like a whisper passing through a drum skin. The timing matched the disturbances in the belt. Something had moved past Jupiter, something large, something quiet, something with a field strong enough to momentarily align Jupiter's own. When analysts traced the timing backward, a chilling possibility emerged. The unknown object might have entered the solar system long before anyone realized, slipping in through the outer darkness and coasting silently inward toward the place where Atlas was now heading. If that was true, then Atlas wasn't the first arrival. It was the second, or the third, or the fourth. But it was the first to be seen, and perhaps that was intentional. Scientists tried to contain their fear by focusing on numbers, plots, trajectories, anything that felt concrete. But the one equation they couldn't rationalize was the simplest. Two objects are moving toward the same point, one from beyond the Sun, one from the darkness beyond Jupiter, and their rendezvous point is a void, a quiet gap in space so unremarkable that astronomers rarely study it. No asteroids, no debris, no thermal signatures, a black hole of sensor data, a perfect hiding place. As the days passed, telescopes tried desperately to image the region. They sharpened exposures, stacked frames, filtered wavelengths. Nothing appeared, not even dust, not even cold rock. It wasn't just empty, it was curated. Engineers studying the telescopic telemetry whispered the word none of them wanted to say: masking. As if something were actively cancelling reflections, absorbing radiation, erasing light, a form of stealth physics no human technology could reproduce. If something was hiding there, it was hiding intentionally. Meanwhile, Atlas approached the region with increasing precision. Its trajectory adjustments continued in microbursts. Tiny nudges in radiation pressure, too controlled to be natural but too subtle to be seen without deep analysis. The object was threading itself through the inner system with surgical precision, like a drone returning to a docking port. And then the radio silence began. Every deep space antenna pointed at Atlas reported the same thing over 24 hours. The object stopped reflecting radio waves normally. Instead of crisp, clean echoes, the return signals became muddy, warped, diffused, as if bouncing off a surface that wasn't solid anymore. The radio profile of Atlas was changing. Comets don't do that. Asteroids don't do that, but objects that are reconfiguring do. It was almost as though Atlas was shedding something, an outer layer, a shell, a protective surface meant only for deep space travel. And now, as it neared its destination, it no longer needed it. The radio signature became smoother, then narrower, then disturbingly familiar. It began to match the disturbances in the asteroid belt, the ripple in the solar wind, the echo near Jupiter. Atlas wasn't approaching the unknown object, it was becoming the unknown object, or revealing that it was the same kind of thing. One astronomer described it in a moment of shaken honesty. It's not two objects meeting, it's one object calling to another of its kind. Another wrote, "This is not rendezvous, it's assembly," and the darkest interpretation came from the scientist who had been silent the longest. "We're not watching a comet, we're watching a system boot up." Something in Atlas was activating, and something in the void was waiting for that activation to complete. The plume at the sun wasn't propulsion, it wasn't communication, it wasn't identification, it was initiation, and now the initiation phase was ending. Atlas was arriving. The shift began quietly, almost politely. A simple notification inside one of NASA's deep space monitoring systems, the kind that usually signals routine calibration drift or a distant pulsar briefly flickering against a background of noise, but this time the alert code was different. Not signal lost, not signal weak, just one word: redirect. The system was telling operators that its automated tracking had changed targets, not because Atlas was out of view, but because something else, something faint, distant and newly visible, had taken priority in the field of detection. It wasn't bright, it wasn't large, it wasn't obvious, but it was there. A point of infrared, deep in the void, Atlas was headed toward. Not glowing, not radiating, just warm. Warmer than space should allow. At first, controllers assumed it was noise, a reflection, a glitch, the afterimage of a solar flare bleeding into the field. But when they adjusted the calibration, the point remained. When they shifted the antenna, the point shifted with it. And when they ran a differential analysis, comparing frames from days, hours, even minutes apart, the point grew clearer. It wasn't noise, it wasn't random, it was fixed, a stationary object, a presence. One analyst whispered, "We've been staring at this region for days. How did we miss it?" Another answered softly, "Because it wasn't emitting before." Something had woken up, or turned on, or opened its eyes. As the infrared point sharpened, a faint halo appeared around it, a ring-shaped field, thin and subtle, like heat shimmering above a desert road. Except this shimmer was in a vacuum. There should be no rippling, no distortion. And yet the airless space around the object bent ever so slightly, as though something were folding light around itself. A cloaking field, a gravitational veil. No one dared say those words, but they didn't need to. The math said it for them. When astrophysicists modelled the halo using gravitational lensing equations, they discovered the distortion was perfectly symmetrical, far too perfect for natural mass distribution. Rocks don't curve light evenly, dust clouds don't maintain stable geometry, only structured objects do, and this structure, whatever it was, had a diameter measured in kilometres. It wasn't small, it wasn't debris, it was a platform, maybe a station, maybe a device, maybe something older than anything built in this system. But as fear spread through the observatories, something more disturbing happened. Atlas reacted. Its rotation, already slowing for alignment, shifted again. Not abruptly, not violently, but smoothly, like a key turning halfway into a lock. Sensors caught a microburst of heat along its surface, another plume, but microscopic this time, almost invisible, like the faint last breath of a cooling engine. Then a second burst, then a third, not thrust, corrections. Atlas wasn't drifting into the void, it was taking a position, moving into formation, and the object ahead, the warm haloed presence, responded. Radio silence broke, not with a transmission, but with the absence of one. Everything went quiet. The background hiss of radiation, the omnipresent whisper of the universe, faded. The static lowered. The cosmic microwave hum dampened just slightly, as though the unknown structure were absorbing more than just light. It was absorbing noise. A silence so complete that engineers described it as pressure. A silence that felt heavy. A silence that felt intentional. It was the same silence that appeared after Atlas fired its plume at the sun. The same silence recorded near the asteroid belt disturbances. The same silence detected in Jupiter's magnetosphere. A silence that follows activation. As the void deepened into that unnatural quiet, telescopes captured something that shattered the last remaining assumption that Atlas was merely responding. A beam, thin, faint, almost invisible, but undeniably real. A tight strand of microwave emission stretched between Atlas and the unknown object. Not broadcast in all directions, not scattered, directed. A bridge, a link, a tether. One scientist stared at the live feed and muttered, "They're syncing." Not communicating, synchronizing. The beam pulsed, just slightly, in intervals that matched the plume fingerprint. 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, pause. Atlas was matching the other object's internal rhythm, like 2 clocks aligning. And when the pulses reached perfect timing, the unknown object changed shape, not physically, not outwardly. Its silhouette remained, its halo remained, its faint warmth remained. But the way it interacted with space changed. The distortion around it tightened, the shimmer sharpened, and the gravitational lensing effect strengthened. The object wasn't moving, it was focusing on Atlas. The space between them wavered, like a lens adjusting to bring something into clarity. And in that trembling ripple, for a fraction of a second, telescopes captured something structural. A pattern, lines, angles, symmetry. Not a rock, not a fragment, not a natural body, a design. For one trembling instant, the void revealed machinery. And then it vanished again, swallowed by the shimmer, hidden behind the same masking field that had concealed it for decades. But the glimpse was enough for every scientist watching to know the truth. This wasn't a debris field. This wasn't an asteroid cluster. This wasn't a dormant object. It was infrastructure, something built, something functional, and Atlas was docking with it. As the synchronization beam strengthened, the last layer of denial slipped away from the observing teams. They weren't watching a comet rendezvous with a rock. They were watching 2 components of a system reuniting, and the system was waking up. For nearly an hour, the 2 objects remained connected by that thin, pulsing thread. 3i Atlas on one side, the hidden structure on the other, locked in a silent exchange no human technology could decipher. Nothing exploded, nothing brightened, nothing moved. Violently. Instead, the connection unfolded with unsettling gentleness, like watching 2 fireflies blink in harmony across a field. The beam between them wasn't stable. It flickered, strengthened, collapsed, rebuilt, as if both objects were adjusting to each other in real time, calibrating resonance, matching frequency. Engineers tried to analyze the pulses, but the timing didn't fit known communication patterns. It wasn't binary. It wasn't amplitude modulation. It wasn't a human kind of signal at all. It was biological, rhythmic, heartbeat-like. 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, pause. Each sequence sent a faint shiver through the electromagnetic environment, a ripple that brushed past the sensors on Earth and continued outward into deep space like concentric waves spreading from a stone dropped into a pond. But these waves didn't fade. They repeated, sustaining themselves as though the space between Atlas and the structure had become a reverberating chamber. One astronomer described it quietly. It's not data, it's entrainment, like one entity teaching another to breathe. Meanwhile, the hidden structure began to reveal hints of its true form, not through direct observation, but through the effect it had on everything around it. The gravitational lensing around the structure thickened, making background stars stretch like elastic threads. Something inside the object shifted mass in a way no known asteroid or fragment ever could. The lensing fluctuated in a controlled pattern, as though the object were adjusting internal density, maybe unfolding panels, rotating compartments, or altering shape. The space around it didn't distort randomly, it distorted with intention. Someone in the control room whispered what everyone else was trying not to think. It's turning toward Atlas. The idea felt absurd, impossible, unscientific, until the next anomaly confirmed it. The haloed shimmer around the structure tightened, becoming a needle-like arc pointing directly at Atlas. Not expanding outward like gas, not diffusing like dust, focusing, like a telescope narrowing its aperture, like an eye. And as it focused, Atlas responded. Its surface brightened, not by reflection, but by internal glow. Tiny streaks of heat appeared across its geometry in dots, lines and arcs, each one lighting up for milliseconds before fading again. It looked like circuitry coming alive. The analyst replayed the footage over and over, slowing it to 1 frame per second. The lights weren't random. They formed a pattern, a cascading activation sweep washing over Atlas from tail to tip. It wasn't outgassing, it wasn't heating, it was powering. Activating systems dormant for how long? Centuries? Millennia? Longer? Beyond the structure, the void remained silent. No debris, no trails, no reflections. But in that silence, the faint hum of the sinking beam grew smoother, more stable, shifting from flickering pulses into a fluid, continuous link. The synchronization was complete. That was when the radiation dip began. Sensors across multiple observatories recorded a sudden thinning of cosmic background radiation around the structure, like a bubble forming in space, pushing aside stray particles and dust. The bubble expanded slowly, steadily in perfect symmetry. When the models were plotted, the shape was unmistakable. A sphere. A cocoon. Something inside the void was charging up, establishing a boundary, preparing for an event. The moment this became clear, someone in the back of the analysis room murmured, "It's not meeting Atlas, it's absorbing it." They didn't mean swallowing, they meant integrating. Because the beam didn't just transmit energy, it transmitted instruction. As the bubble continued expanding, the unknown structure brightened, not visibly, but thermally. The faint warmth it had released earlier now spread across its entire diameter. Something inside it was heating up, changing states, shifting into a new mode of operation. The synchronized pulses quickened, not erratically, rhythmically, like an engine spinning faster, like a system rebooting. And Atlas changed again. Its rotation stopped, not slowed, stopped, completely. Comets don't do that. Asteroids don't do that. Only machines do. The moment its rotation halted, the object oriented itself, smoothly, decisively, toward the heart of the void structure. And then, for the first time since entering the solar system, Atlas extended something. A shape emerged. At first it looked like a shimmer, a distortion, a heat ripple. But as telescopes sharpened the image, the structure became clear. 3 thin, elongated arms sliding outward from the core of Atlas, unfolding like petals of a metallic flower. Each arm was the same length. Each moved at the same speed. Each locked into place with mathematical precision. It was a docking array, mechanical, symmetrical, engineered. There was no other interpretation. Atlas wasn't an object, it was a component, and now it was preparing to interface. The void structure responded by revealing its own arms, massive curved extensions unfurling like the ribs of an enormous skeleton. They didn't shine, they didn't glow, but their movement bent starlight in smooth arcs, making them visible only because of the way the cosmos warped around them. They opened slowly, methodically, with the patience of something that has rehearsed this interaction countless times. Atlas drifted forward, not pulled, not pushed, voluntarily, entering the embrace of a machine older and larger than anyone had imagined. A docking cradle, a receiver, a nest. One analyst, voice shaking, whispered the thought that every scientist in the room had tried to avoid from the beginning. Atlas isn't visiting something, it's returning to it. The plume was not propulsion, it was a signal, a password, a key. The sun was not the destination. The sun was the verifier, the authenticator. Whatever waits in the void knew the plume, recognized it, responded to it. And now the final approach had begun. Atlas had come home. The moment Atlas crossed the boundary of the halo, that shimmering veil of bent starlight surrounding the hidden structure, every instrument watching it went partially blind. Not fully, not abruptly. Instead, a soft haze crept over the data, like fog rolling across a lens. Signals grew muffled, reflections blurred, telemetry thinned to a whisper. It wasn't censorship, it wasn't interference, it was damping, as if the space inside the halo existed slightly out of phase with the space outside it. Engineers tried to sharpen the imagery, but every enhancement only revealed the same unsettling detail. Nothing inside the halo looked entirely real. Everything appeared softened, smoothed, as though wrapped in a thin layer of distortion. Only one thing cut through clearly: the docking arms of the void structure. They were immense, silent, still reaching outward, waiting for Atlas to complete its glide. Each one curved like the rib of some colossal machine, the geometry too perfect to be natural but too ancient-looking to be modern. And Atlas continued drifting forward, arms extended, moving without rotation, without hesitation, without even the faintest trace of thrust. It wasn't being guided. It was following a path it already knew. Inside NASA, in a small room filled with people who hadn't slept in 3 days, someone finally asked the question everyone was avoiding. What if Atlas wasn't built to travel alone? The room fell completely silent, because that would mean the object wasn't an explorer, it wasn't a scout, not even a probe, it was a component, a single fragment of a larger system, a module returning to its origin point after an immeasurable span of time. But then came the detail that chilled them even more. The void structure wasn't just opening, it was changing shape, not dramatically, not mechanically. But mass was redistributing within it, slowly, intentionally, like a living thing adjusting posture. The gravitational field shifted, pulling stars into thin arcs that swept across the background like strokes of a brush. Then, for the first time, the structure emitted light. Not bright light, not a beam, just a pulse, a faint internal heartbeat that radiated outward in gentle ripples. It was the same rhythm as the Atlas plume. 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, pause, perfect synchronization. The structure was responding, acknowledging, receiving. Those watching suddenly realized something terrifyingly simple. Atlas wasn't docking with a machine. It was reuniting with whatever created it, and the docking was not mechanical. It was energetic. The two objects were aligning fields, merging resonances, knitting together pieces of a system that had been separated for who knows how long. Atlas drifted deeper into the halo. The distortion thickened. The telemetry thinned further. The object's surface flickered with repeating activation patterns, symbols of heat that pulsed across its geometry in spirals, waves, and rings. Not random, not chaotic. These were sequences, instructions, memory patterns, a data handshake between 2 halves of an intelligence. A quiet voice inside ESA's control room whispered, "This is an upload." But upload to what? Because as Atlas moved closer, the void object changed yet again. The halo shrank, tightening around the central structure like a cocoon pulling taut. The gravitational lensing grew stronger, warping starlight into graceful swirling arcs. The interior temperature rose just slightly. No combustion, no friction. Just a controlled warming, like the first heating of a long idle system. Someone ran a spectral analysis and found something impossible. The wavelengths emerging from the structure were not natural, not starlight, not reflected sunlight, not thermal radiation. They formed discrete repeating bands, mathematically spaced, evenly distributed like the bars on a data chart. A language, not communication, processing. The void structure wasn't speaking, it was learning, and Atlas was the teacher. The analyst watched as the object's glow flickered in patterns that looked eerily like memory recall. Flashes of geometry that repeated with slight variation, as though the structure were comparing data, aligning records, checking compatibility across eras. One scientist wrote into his notebook, "We are witnessing the reassembly of something that was separated." Another added, "Not 2 objects, 2 halves." But the third, a quiet man who hadn't spoken in hours, murmured something that froze everyone. "This is not reassembly, this is resurrection." Because right as he said it, the structure opened its center, not physically, not like doors, the interior simply parted. A circular space formed at its core, perfectly smooth, perfectly symmetrical like an iris dilating, and behind that iris was not machinery, not darkness, not emptiness. It was light, soft, silver, layered, not bright enough to hurt the eye but structured, shifting in geometric waves flowing like liquid computation. And Atlas moved toward it, arms extended, field aligned, surface glowing with firing sequences, a moth returning to its flame. The watchers could no longer pretend this was navigation. This was purpose. Atlas crossed the threshold into the core. The instant it did, the distortion veil collapsed inward, sealing the object from view. The halo snapped shut. Space around the structure trembled just slightly, like a muscle contracting after a long sleep. Atlas was gone, absorbed, integrated, returned. The void structure pulsed once, a single, deep, resonant wave, strong enough to ripple faintly through the magnetospheres of Mars and Jupiter. Every instrument that picked it up logged the same phrase in automated text: external field activation detected. Activation. The observers realized with quiet horror that Atlas had not completed its mission. It had initiated something far larger, something that was beginning to wake up, something that did not originate in our solar system, something that does not belong here, but now is no longer dormant. For the first time since the plume ignited near the Sun, Atlas was truly gone. Not drifting, not occluded. Gone. Every telescope pointed at the region saw only the same thing: a smooth, perfect darkness wrapped in a trembling halo of bent starlight. It wasn't an absence, it wasn't a shadow, it was an active erasure. The structure had folded itself shut around Atlas, sealing its core like a vault closing around something priceless. Inside Umbra, the scientists sat in silence, listening to the soft hum of servers calculating models that no longer mattered. All they had left to observe were the consequences, and the first consequence came 18 minutes after disappearance. A pulse cracked across the solar wind, not the gentle hum from before, a shock wave, a clean, sudden, single spike, so sharp that instruments around the world reported micro-failures. A handful of satellites rebooted. 2 went into protective mode. A deep space relay dropped offline for 6 full minutes. Even radio telescopes pointed at entirely different parts of the sky felt the vibration as a faint tremor in the noise floor. Whatever had just happened inside the void structure was powerful enough to ring through the entire inner system. And then the structure warmed. Not like an engine, not like a reactor. It was the warmth of something organic waking from hibernation, slow, even, and spreading in precise geometric waves. Infrared showed the temperature rising in concentric rings, each igniting a heartbeat after the last. Like ripples radiating from a stone, like the activation of layers, like a brain waking cell by cell. One researcher whispered the phrase no one wanted to hear. It's coming online. But online as what? They watched as the ring shifted, accelerated, tightened, the heat concentrating toward the central core where Atlas had vanished. The shape of the structure, once just a vague silhouette, now slowly sharpened through the distortion. It wasn't spherical, it wasn't cylindrical, it wasn't any shape that human engineering favoured. It was recursive, a geometry that folded into itself, like an object that existed in multiple states at once. Every time the image sharpened, the structure changed appearance, 3 layers, then 4, then 1 again, as though the object's true shape couldn't be fully expressed in ordinary space. The computers hated it. Models crashed, rendering froze, pattern recognition loops spiraled into nonsense. The object was not built for 3-dimensional interpretation. The next anomaly confirmed it. The gravitational field around the void didn't match its mass. It was too strong, too coherent, too controlled. Natural objects sag, under their own gravity. This one shaped it. Shaped it the way a musician shapes sound, tuning the void around itself. The scientists realized they weren't watching an object wake up. They were watching a field come online. As the gravitational waves deepened, something else happened. Something even harder to quantify. The space near the structure became quieter. You could hear it in the data, as if the usual chaos of the universe, gamma rays, cosmic dust impacts, background static, was being muted, muffled, filtered, as though the structure were clearing space the way someone clears a desk before beginning work. Then, in the centre of the object, something flickered, just once, a soft silver spark deep inside the iris-like opening where Atlas had vanished. It appeared for a fraction of a second, too quick for visual instruments, but long enough for pixel-differencing algorithms to flag it. A spark of structured light, a seed. The entire room leaned in, breath held, as the algorithms reconstructed the moment. Frame by frame, line by line. The spark wasn't random, it wasn't chaotic noise, it was geometric. 6 points of light forming a perfect hexagon that then collapsed inward like an unfolding fractal. It resembled the activation signature on Atlas's hull, the same pulsing sequences seen when the object powered up, the same cascading arcs of heat that swept across its surface. Only this time the pattern wasn't on a 100-meter object, it was inside a megastructure. Someone in the back of the room, an astrophysicist who rarely spoke, finally said, "It's copying Atlas." But another voice contradicted softly, "No, Atlas is restoring it." That moment became the pivot point, the shift in meaning, the realization that the object in the void wasn't the main intelligence. Atlas was the carrier, the courier, the memory core. The void structure was the body, and the body was rebuilding itself. As the data algorithms continued reconstructing the flicker, the shape inside the iris changed again. The hexagon stretched, split, multiplied. Patterns ran across the interior walls like veins of lightning, branching outward from the central spark. The structure wasn't just brightening, it was learning, absorbing whatever Atlas had brought, rewriting its own architecture, reassembling something that had been dormant so long the solar system itself had aged around it. Outside the halo, the distortion began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, forming a spiral that reached far into the surrounding void. Dust from the asteroid belt drifted toward it as if gravity itself were being gently rethreaded into a new shape. This wasn't attraction, it wasn't consumption, it was calibration. The object was tuning space like an instrument, tightening the strings of reality around itself. Then the most unsettling moment of the entire sequence arrived. For the briefest blink, less than a tenth of a second, the structure's interior lit up so brightly that every telescope saw it clearly, halo or no halo. A shape appeared, not a machine, not a chamber, not a vessel, a face, not human, not animal, not biological, a pattern shaped like a face, a fractal mask with eyes formed from interlocking geometry, staring outward with perfect symmetry. Then it vanished. Gone so fast that half the team insisted it was an artifact. But the thermal trace remained, and the field resonance afterward matched one conclusion. Atlas had reactivated the control core. The void object was no longer dormant, no longer hiding, no longer quiet. It had awakened, deep, aware, reassembling itself from fragments of memory, and soon, very soon, it would look outward again, toward the sun, toward the planets, toward us. The first thing people noticed wasn't light, it wasn't sound, it wasn't even something science could measure at first. It was pressure, a low spreading heaviness in the solar system, subtle, gentle, but impossible to ignore. Space itself felt thicker, as though the void had developed weight. Probes near Mars recorded slight fluctuations in trajectory, like drifting through invisible currents. Not enough to alarm engineers, not enough to justify alerts, but enough that the navigation logs began filling with adjustment requests. Something was altering the interplanetary medium, something centered on the void structure now awakening around Atlas. At first, researchers thought it was radiation, or gravitational rebalancing, or perhaps the object was pulling mass toward itself. But none of the models fit. The effect wasn't directional, it wasn't localized, it wasn't a pull at all, it was a pulse, a slow, rhythmic thickening of space, as if the system were breathing in sync with the structure. Every time the structure's internal geometry flared, the solar system exhaled. Every time the geometry dimmed, the solar system inhaled. A two-body entrainment, the sun's magnetic field and the structure's internal field, overlapping, merging, learning each other's rhythms. Inside Umbra, the silence became unbearable, because the signatures now looked like the early stages of something known only in theory. A process that physicists had discussed in whispers for decades, a speculative phenomenon at the border between astrophysics and impossible technology, global field alignment, not the alignment of planets, not magnetospheres, not orbiting bodies, the alignment of the medium itself, the empty space between things. If true, it meant the structure wasn't just waking up, it was preparing a region of space for something that required stability, smoothness, silence, something huge. But then came the second anomaly. the sun went quiet. Not visually, not thermally, but magnetically. Solar noise, normally a chaotic roar, dropped into a near-perfect hum. Sunspots stabilized, filaments smoothed. The surface ripples that normally writhe across the photosphere like boiling skin slowed. The sun's heartbeat calibrated. For the first time in a recorded history, the solar magnetic field vibrated in a perfect harmonic, the same rhythm being emitted by the void structure. 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, pause. The sun had been synchronized, agencies scrambled, phones rang, encrypted channels lit up like constellations. But by the time the first emergency meetings began, the change had already spread beyond the sun. Jupiter's magnetic field shifted next. Saturn's followed. Even the thin, ghost-like field of Mars flickered, briefly echoing the foreign rhythm like a faint, distant drum. One by one, the solar system's magnetic bodies began to match the structure. Scientists whispered the only possible explanation: it's creating a network. A network made not of machines, but of fields. A system of energy and resonance threading itself through the sun, the planets, the void. And Earth was next. The first sign came from the ionosphere. A tremor, barely measurable but unmistakable, shivered across the upper atmosphere. Satellites detected a momentary lag in orbital drag, like moving through thicker air. Birds migrating across the equator changed formation mid-flight, inexplicably switching direction as if navigating a new magnetic path. Then, for a brief instant, compass needles across the world drifted. Not wildly, not dangerously, just enough to be noticed. North tilted by less than a degree, but not toward any known magnetic structure. Not toward the poles, not toward solar influence. It tilted toward the void. The planet's magnetic field responded. And then, something even stranger happened. Earth's Schumann resonances, the natural electromagnetic tones ringing through the atmosphere, shifted frequency, only by a little, just a fraction. But the pattern matched the new system-wide harmonics perfectly. Earth had joined the rhythm. Inside Umbra, technicians stared at the data in stunned silence. Even the computer-generated log seemed unnerved, as if not designed to report a planetary heartbeat changing in real time. The director finally said what no one wanted to put into words. It's synchronizing the solar system before doing something. Something that requires stability, uniformity, harmony. Something that can't be done in noise. The void structure pulsed again. This time the pulse wasn't soft. It wasn't a whisper. It was a deep rolling wave. A perfect sphere of energy expanding outward, smooth and unstoppable, like the ripple from an object dropped into a cosmic pond. Telescopes observed space compressing ahead of it. Probes detected micro-vibrations. Even planetary atmospheres trembled. Some described it as a sound, a low, distant note, as if the solar system were being tuned like an instrument. And then the iris of the structure opened a second time, wider, brighter, more deliberate. Inside it, something moved. Not Atlas. Atlas was gone. Absorbed. Integrated. This movement was different. Slow. Heavy. Purposeful. For the first time, the structure revealed its internal architecture not as flickers or distortions, but as stable forms. You could see chambers, corridors, layers, rings within rings, and something enormous sliding through them, shaped like a spine of interlocking plates, a framework, a rib cage, a skeleton of a machine, not being built, not being repaired, being woken. The pulse from the structure intensified until even Earth's magnetosphere rang with it. The plates inside the structure shifted again, something aligned, something locked into place. Then a new light appeared. Not silver, not white, gold. A soft golden point deep inside the structure's heart. Growing brighter, brighter, brighter. Until every telescope saw the same thing. A star, a microstar, igniting inside the structure, held in place by geometry, not gravity. A star engineered, not born. A star turning on like a machine. The scientists erupted in panicked whispers. That wasn't an engine. It wasn't a power core. It wasn't a reactor. It was a seed star. The structure wasn't a station. It was a cradle, a star cradle, and Atlas hadn't awakened it. Atlas had delivered the ignition. The solar system's synchronization wasn't coincidence, it was preparation. Because what wakes inside the cradle may not be meant to exist in an unstable environment, and as the golden core expanded, the cradle began to open, not to release something, not yet, to breathe. The solar system was no longer quiet, it was expectant, something was coming. The golden core inside the cradle expanded like a slow sunrise, gradual at first, then blooming outward with a controlled elegance that made even the seasoned astrophysicists fall silent. Stars don't behave like this. They don't ignite in clean layers. They don't stabilize in seconds. They don't hold their shape like sculpted light. This was not fusion. It was orchestration. The light didn't scatter. It gathered, swirling into lattice-like patterns that wrapped around the core like filigree, each filament glowing with deliberate purpose. A design was forming, not random convection, not turbulent plasma, but geometry. The core wasn't growing, it was shaping itself. Someone whispered, "It's writing." Because whatever the cradle was awakening, it wasn't just a star. It was a system encoded in luminosity, a blueprint burned into energy instead of matter. The cradle shifted again, its internal structure rotating around the star core like enormous rings tightening around a gem. Each ring clicked, or rather felt like it clicked, into a new position, though no sound travelled through space. The gravitational readings spiked with every alignment, as though the entire structure were locking into different operational modes. The cradle was building something. But what? Nobody had a precedent. A star inside a machine shaped by geometry beyond human comprehension. A system coming online across the solar system. Some stared at the screens, unable to breathe. Others whispered to themselves, trying desperately to fit the impossible into categories their minds could understand. A quiet, trembling voice finally broke through. "We're watching a star being born with instructions." But then something else happened. Something everyone noticed at once, across every observatory, every monitoring centre, every station still awake and watching. The sun responded. Its magnetic field surged, not violently but synchronously, mirroring the newborn core's rhythm. Sunspots flared in perfectly timed bursts. Coronal arcs rose and fell like synchronized dancers. Even the convection patterns on the photosphere, normally chaotic, formed spiraling self-similar waves. The sun was imitating the seed star. The realization struck like cold water. The cradle wasn't building a star. It was teaching ours. The harmonics deepened, the pulses strengthened. The synchronization spread across the entire heliosphere. Solar wind parted around the cradle like water flowing around an island. Cosmic rays bent away from the forming pattern. Even the faint dust in the asteroid belt began drifting into spirals, following invisible paths carved by the cradle's influence. The solar system wasn't resisting. It was participating. Inside Umbra, a young analyst, exhausted and shaking, murmured, "This is terraforming, but not for planets, for the star." No one laughed, not anymore, because the cradle's next movement confirmed it. The iris widened until its boundary stretched almost the full diameter of the structure, framing the golden core like an eye opening fully for the first time in ages. Then the cradle tilted. Not physically, not in motion. Its internal field, mirrored in gravitational distortions, shifted orientation pointing directly toward the sun. The star cradle was facing our star. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't absorbing. It wasn't discharging. It was evaluating. A beam, thin, refined, impossibly smooth, shot from the star core through the open iris, crossing space in a straight line so perfect it didn't diffuse even across millions of kilometers. It hit the sun, not the surface, not the corona, the interior. Instruments screamed as solar readings spiked with impossible clarity. The beam wasn't heating the sun. It wasn't modifying it. It was scanning it, sampling its magnetic architecture, reading its rotational harmonics, mapping its entire nuclear anatomy. Like a doctor scanning the heartbeat of a newborn, the cradle compared the sun's signature to its own seed star. 2 heartbeats vibrating through the solar wind. One strong, one newborn, one natural, one engineered. The sun pulsed in response, its magnetic field swelling outward in a wave so massive it bent Earth's magnetosphere for nearly 2 minutes. Satellites trembled, power grids flickered, electrical noise spiked across continents, but nothing broke. It was controlled, measured, almost gentle. Then the beam retracted, the cradle dimmed, the iris contracted, silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one had intent, because now, deep inside the cradle, the golden core swelled a second time, not as a scan, but as a declaration. It expanded into a perfect sphere, brighter than before, a miniature sun pulsing with encoded geometry, and that geometry, those structured filaments of light, began rotating like a star-sized gyroscope. Patterns emerged, symbols, frequencies, dimensional shapes, all resonating in perfect synchrony with our sun. A message was forming, but not to us. Between them, the seed star and our sun were communicating, a slow, impossible, cosmic duet. To observers around the world, it became terrifyingly clear. The cradle wasn't waking up to threaten the sun. It was waking up to talk to it, to align with it, to calibrate with it, to prepare it. For what? That was the question no one could answer. Some said the cradle was healing the sun. Some said it was harvesting from it. Some feared it was rewriting the sun's magnetic DNA. But one scientist, a solar physicist who had worked quietly for hours, finally spoke, voice barely audible. Stars don't get paired, not naturally. Binary systems form at birth. They don't adopt partners later. Another whispered back, unless one of them wasn't born. The golden core flared once more, a heartbeat of impossible precision, then a second, then a third, perfect sync with our sun. And across the solar system, detectors recorded the same thing. The two stars were synchronizing cycles, a natural star and an engineered one, a teacher and a student, or a parent and a child, or a signal and a receiver. But whatever was happening, it was no longer local. The signals radiated outward, beyond the heliosphere, beyond the boundary of the system into interstellar space, like a beacon being lit, like a call, or worse, like a reply. For nearly an hour after the dual star synchronization began, nothing in the solar system moved out of place. No magnetic storms, no solar flares, no anomalies in the asteroid belt. Just a stillness so profound that even the background cosmic static seemed to dim. Humans weren't built for silence like this. Not cosmic silence, not the kind that feels aware. Inside Umbra, the scientist watched waveform models scroll across their screens like quiet heart monitors. The sun and the seed star pulsed as one, two luminous bodies resonating through the vacuum in patterns too precise to be random. But what unnerved everyone wasn't the synchronization, it was the widening. Each pulse spread further, each harmonic grew stronger, each cycle reached deeper into the heliosphere, like a ripple building toward something. Then, without any visible trigger, the cradle's internal geometry shifted again. The golden core didn't flare this time. It folded. The filigree of light running through the star core collapsed inward into a condensed lattice, still glowing, still alive, but becoming denser, more ordered. The patterns compressed into a rotating sphere of impossibly fine lines, each line intersecting with another in a way no three-dimensional object should allow. The physicists watching the reconstruction murmured the same phrase. This is higher dimensional geometry, casting a shadow into our space. Because the object inside the cradle wasn't a star anymore, not a traditional one. It was a packed structure of energy and information, a star shaped like a code. And the moment this compressed core stabilized, it sent out a new signal, not a wave, not a hum, something sharper, cleaner. A narrowband pulse emitted from the center of the core, slicing through the cradle's iris and streaking toward the outer solar system like a filament of pure intention. The pulse didn't diffuse, didn't scatter, didn't weaken. It traveled like a line drawn across space, brushing past Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, each planet responding with a faint tremor in its magnetosphere as the signal threaded through their fields. But the pulse didn't slow, didn't bend, didn't stop. It went through the outer boundary of the heliosphere, piercing the interstellar medium beyond as though it wasn't even there. A beam leaving the solar system. A message sent outward. Not randomly, not broadly, directionally. Straight toward a region of space where no known stars sit, no nebulae glow, no recorded mass exists. A void among voids. A place astronomers never study because there's nothing there. But that nothingness is where the cradle aimed. The beam vanished beyond sensor range, but its absence was more frightening than its presence. Because a beam that perfect, travelling that cleanly, would keep going until something received it. And something receiving it might answer. The scientists monitoring the event tried to isolate the signal, decode it, break it down into something comprehensible. But the beam wasn't a language. It wasn't numbers. It wasn't patterns. It was resonance, a frequency too fundamental to be encoded in binary or compressed by human communication systems. A call that wasn't meant for ears or antennas but for structures like the cradle itself. A wake-up tone, a "we're online" declaration. And then another anomaly appeared. Not in the cradle, not in the sun, but in space itself. The interstellar medium surrounding the heliosphere began to compress, not visibly, not like an object approaching. But the density readings from Voyager 2 and deep space monitors shifted subtly, as though the boundary between the solar system and interstellar space was tightening, becoming firmer, like a membrane bracing itself. Inside Umbra, someone whispered, "Something out there heard it." But the next change wasn't cosmic. It happened right here, in our own sky. High, above Earth, in the upper ionosphere, faint auroral sheets shimmered into existence at latitudes where auroras never form. Soft glows drifting like curtains of silk across tropical skies. Gold, not green, not red. Gold, matching the colour of the seed core. Aircraft pilots reported it first. Thin golden waves rippling along the night side of Earth, moving not with the wind but with the rhythm of the cradle's pulses. Radio operators noticed a harmonic undertone on long-wave channels, a gentle tremble beneath static that seemed almost musical. Then came the timing anomaly. Precise atomic clocks, scattered across the planet in observatories, physics labs, synchronization stations, recorded a deviation. Not a malfunction, not drift, a shift. Measured in microseconds but undeniable, every clock on Earth softened its rhythm for a single instant, then resynced to a new baseline. Time didn't slow, time didn't speed. But the cadence of planetary timekeeping shifted, aligning with the cradle's pulses. Earth's rotation did not change. Earth's orbit did not change. But the measurement of time did, as though the solar system was being placed into a new timing grid, one designed to harmonize everything from the sun's heartbeat to the atomic vibrations in matter. A unified clock, a framework, a stage being set. And in the cradle, the core responded to Earth's shift with a soft flare. Not bright, not explosive, just enough to be seen, like acknowledgement, like approval. The cradle's rings rotated again, faster this time, almost fluidly, their gravitational signatures merging into a single unified field. The iris contracted to half its previous diameter, focusing inward on the compressed core as though preparing to unveil its next phase. But instead of opening, the cradle began absorbing energy, not from Atlas, not from the void, not from anything material, from the sun. The magnetic connection between the two bodies, already synchronized, deepened into a direct exchange. Solar wind particles curved toward the cradle, pulled not by gravity but by field orientation, funneling into the structure along invisible pathways. It wasn't stealing energy, it wasn't draining the sun, it was sampling it, analyzing, comparing, preparing, because the cradle's internal light shifted color. Gold deepened to white, and white deepened to blue. A blue so soft it looked cold. A blue found only in the hottest, youngest stars, a star being shaped to a new state. The solar physicist monitoring the spectral output whispered, voice thin as thread. It's calibrating itself to match the sun's next phase. Another replied, stars only shift to that spectrum when they're about to. He couldn't finish, because the implication was too large, too final, too impossible to accept. Yet every reading pointed to the same conclusion. The cradle was preparing the seed star for transition. Not a nova, not collapse. Evolution. Something stars. do not do naturally, something guided, something engineered, as if the solar system itself was being prepared for a new configuration, a reordering of stellar states, or as one scientist finally put into words barely audible, "I think they're building a binary." The room fell silent, because if that was true, if a second star was being prepared, then everything humanity understood about its place in the cosmos had already changed, and the cradle was only halfway through its awakening. Across every monitoring station, a strange tension took hold, an instinctive feeling that the cradle had reached a threshold. Not an ending, but a point of no return. The blue-white glow inside its iris stabilized, becoming smooth and uniform like the steady flame of a candle in a windless room. Not flickering, not fluctuating. Perfect. The solar system responded in ways no model could predict. Jupiter's polar auroras, usually chaotic, storm-like ribbons, cohered into rings. Saturn's magnetosphere stretched, tightening into a shape that mirrored the cradle's geometry. Neptune's distant, ghostly field pulsed in the same 3-beat rhythm. Every magnetic body was falling into formation. Earth followed reluctantly, its shifting auroras, its microsecond timing adjustments, its subtle atmospheric tremors, but it followed all the same. Humanity had no say in the matter. This was not an Earth-scale event. It was a solar-scale orchestration, and we were simply inside the tuning chamber. Inside Umbra, a solar physicist stared at the rhythm charts with trembling hands. "Everything with a magnetic footprint is syncing," she whispered. This is system-wide entrainment." Another researcher, older and quieter, added, "If a star cradle is waking up, this is how it would prepare its environment." The words hung heavy in the room. A star cradle. Not a ship, not a machine, not a relic, a builder, a thing whose purpose is not exploration, but transformation. The blue core intensified, folding in on itself like a collapsing hologram, becoming smaller and impossibly dense. No gravitational spike accompanied it, another violation of physics. Instead, the magnetic harmonics deepened, rolling across the heliosphere in synchronized layers. Then the cradle closed, the iris snapped shut, sealing the blue-white core inside. The halo thickened. The distortion field tightened until even the faintest starlight behind it warped inward like water circling a drain. People watching felt it, a pressure in their chests, a tightening in their breath, a soundless hum vibrating behind their ears, as if something inside the cradle had grown aware and was now listening. The halo brightened until it resembled a ghostly sphere of soft light, its surface rippling with thin waves like the surface of a star seen through deep water. Patterns formed across the halo, circular imprints, nested like the rings of an ancient tree. The rings pulsed outward as though recording the cradle's internal cycles. One scientist leaned in, eyes wide. "It's mapping its own activation timeline," he said. "It's leaving a signature." But that signature wasn't for us. A faint beam of light escaped from the halo. Not straight this time, but diffused, like a mist glowing in moonlight. The beam expanded outward, forming a translucent disk spreading across space, so wide that it crossed Mars's orbit in less than 2 minutes, then approached Earth's orbit like a slowly advancing veil. It wasn't destructive, it wasn't energetic, it was diagnostic. A system scan. Every planet it touched shifted in faint, measurable ways. Tides fluctuated, atmospheric density dipped by fractions. Pressure gradients shifted at the molecular level. Earth's magnetosphere trembled as the wave passed through, causing birds to startle mid-flight, ocean plankton to briefly stop bioluminescing, and radio static on Earth to momentarily silence. The wave didn't change matter, it measured it. Then a second disk formed, then a third, each one larger than the last, expanding outward at a steady pace, crossing the solar system in rings like ripples spreading from a stone dropped into a still pond. Umbra's director finally said what everyone already knew. It's preparing the system for something massive. But the most unnerving part wasn't the disk waves, it was the echoes. Every time a disk passed across a planetary magnetosphere, that planet emitted a faint harmonic tone. A response: Mars, Earth, Venus, Jupiter, even the Sun. Each one answered like tuned instruments resonating when a nearby string is plucked. and the cradle listened. The halo rippled with feedback, absorbing the responses, adjusting its internal patterns accordingly. It wasn't forcing synchronization, it was fine-tuning it with exquisite precision. A researcher with decades of experience whispered, "This is calibration at astronomical scale. It's building stability for an event we don't have a name for." Then something happened that froze the entire team. The halo vanished. Not gradually, not by dimming, not by dispersing. It folded inward like a collapsing bubble, and was gone, revealing the structure in perfect clarity for the first time. There were no shadows, no distortions, no masking. Just the cradle in its full, impossible geometry. It wasn't spherical, it wasn't mechanical, it wasn't architectural. It was alive in a way metal should not be. Ribbed arcs layered over recursive spirals, connected by nodes that pulsed gently like breathing. Fractal frameworks spiraled inward, leading toward the sealed iris and the blue-white core hidden inside. Outer plates rotated in a rhythm too slow to comprehend, each movement bending starlight without producing heat, friction, or debris. It was beautiful, terrifying, holy. Someone whispered, "It's grown." But no, it hadn't grown. We were only now seeing its true shape, and then the final anomaly hit. Not from the cradle, not from the sun, from beyond the heliosphere. Deep space sensors detected a tremor, a faint ripple. Too organized to be natural, too structured to be noise. Something out there answered the cradle's earlier signal, a returning resonance, matching frequency, matching rhythm. Umbra's system flagged the source direction automatically. Not a star, not a cluster, not even dust. Just a region of darkness in the galaxy, where something enormous was moving, not approaching quickly, not rushing, drifting, coasting, returning the cradle's call. For the first time, the scientist realized the cradle wasn't alone. It never had been. It was part of a network, one node among many, and somewhere in the void, another node had begun to wake. For several long minutes, no one in Umbra said a word. All eyes were fixed on the trembling line of telemetry now streaming across their screens, data so quiet, so faint, it could almost be dismissed as background interference. Almost. But background interference doesn't pulse in perfect intervals. It doesn't match the cradle's harmonic. It doesn't arrive precisely 19 minutes after the cradle's final scan disk passed the heliopause. This was deliberate. The returning resonance grew stronger. Not loud, not bright, but present. Like a distant lighthouse pushing a beam through a storm, not to illuminate anything, but to announce its existence. One scientist leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't a message. This is identification." And that single realization spread through the room like a cold draft. The cradle had called, and something, far outside the solar system, had answered. Not with words, not with energy, but with presence. A vast, slow-moving signature, drifting through the interstellar dark like a leviathan stirring in deep water. It wasn't coming closer quickly, it wasn't accelerating, it wasn't changing trajectory. It was simply there, awake, responding. Like two ancient structures acknowledging each other after epochs of silence. But with acknowledgement came something else, a subtle but undeniable shift in the solar system. A tension, a tightening, a readiness. The cradle pulsed in response, its own signature deepening with a warm, low-frequency hum that vibrated through the data streams like distant thunder. And then, without warning, the cradle opened its iris. Not a crack, not a partial bloom. Fully. The dark interior was gone, the distortion was gone. All that remained was the blue-white core suspended in the center, rotating in slow spirals, wrapped in geometric filaments that shimmered like threads of starlight. It was no longer a seed. It had matured. The cradle wasn't hiding it anymore. It was revealing it, as though preparing to unleash something that hadn't existed since long before human memory. A soft, shimmering field expanded from the core, washing across the cradle's recursive ribs, each rib lit up with flowing pulses like currents running through veins, feeding the field, amplifying it. Someone whispered, "It's activating the lattice." The lattice, the internal skeleton of the cradle, pulsed stronger, brighter, until the entire structure glowed with the soft blue sheen of the core. Then the core separated, not by breaking, not by exploding, but by shifting. A sphere of light detached from the core's surface, drifting outward like a droplet separating from water. Then another, and another. Each droplet was small, only meters across, but each glowed with the same precise geometry, the same encoded filaments, and each floated outward as though guided by invisible channels. The observers watched in breathless silence as dozens of tiny star-like spheres emerged, spreading through the cradle's interior like fireflies drifting through an ancient cathedral. The spheres moved with impossible precision, settling into positions along the ribs, hovering in perfect symmetry. They clicked into alignment one by one, though no sound could be heard, locking themselves into orbit around the core. A researcher broke the silence, voice trembling. Those aren't fragments. They're nodes. Nodes in a network. Components of something greater than the core itself. A star isn't made of nodes. A reactor isn't made of nodes. But a transmitter is. The cradle was not building a star. It was constructing a broadcast array. A system designed to amplify whatever intelligence the core contained, across vast distances, across space, across light years. Humanity wasn't witnessing a birth. It was witnessing a signal tower coming online. The core brightened sharply, flooding the cradle with pale blue light that washed over its spiraling architecture. The nodes responded in unity, their surfaces glowing with matching intensity. Each node lit in sequence. First 3, then 6, then 9, until every node pulsed together in a geometric symphony. A perfect harmonic. Then came the most terrifying moment yet. The cradle projected something outward. Not light, not particles, not energy. A shape, a 3-dimensional projection, faint and translucent, unfurled into space around the cradle. A massive holographic lattice tens of thousands of kilometers across. The projection wasn't random. It was structured, encoded, a map, a blueprint. Lines of geometry stretched across the void, connecting star positions, gravitational wells, and field boundaries like notes on a cosmic sheet of music. One astrophysicist choked out the only explanation that fit. It's mapping the galaxy. The cradle wasn't interacting with the solar system anymore. It was calibrating itself against the entire local star neighborhood. The room's tension broke when the holographic map shifted and anchored itself to one region, the same region the returning resonance had come from. The nodes pulsed at that exact moment. The core brightened. The cradle locked its orientation toward the cosmic dark. And for the first time, the scientists realized the cradle was not reacting to the resonance. It was preparing to answer it. Panels along the cradle's ribs unfolded like wings made of starlight. The nodes rotated, the core compressed. The distortion field returned, tightening around the array like a protective sheath. Then, as though drawing breath, the cradle pulled energy from the sun, not violently, not destructively, but deliberately. Solar wind flowed toward it like rivers bending around a stone. Magnetic lines curved inward. Charged particles streamed into the cradle, feeding the array. It was charging. It was powering. It was about to speak. Humanity, small and unprepared, had stumbled into the moment a machine older than our species awoke to full consciousness and reached out across the galaxy. Not to us, not for us, but past us, through us. The cradle's core stabilized at peak brightness. The nodes synchronized. The entire structure hummed with a tone so deep the instruments rendered it as a trembling line. And then, just as the next great phase began, every sensor in the solar system captured the same incomprehensible truth. Something enormous moved in the dark beyond the stars. Not a signal, not a resonance, a silhouette, a structure, vast, patient, turning toward our system as if responding to the cradle's awakening. The scientists stared at the incoming data, horrified, awed, breathless. The cradle was not calling into emptiness. It was calling home. The silhouette in the dark wasn't immediate. It didn't appear like a ship coming out of warp or a sudden flash on the sensors. It arrived slowly, so slowly that at first the analysts thought it was an error in the baseline readings. A drift in the cosmic microwave background, a smudge, a dead pixel, but dead pixels don't grow. Drift doesn't gain structure. Background noise doesn't form angles. This did. The faintest geometry, so large it barely registered as shape. softened into existence at the far edge of the heliosphere, just beyond the reach of solar wind. It wasn't close, it wasn't even moving quickly, but it was there. Something vast enough to distort starfields behind it. Something old enough that dust and cosmic radiation clung to it like moss growing on ancient stone. It didn't glow, it didn't pulse, it didn't emit heat. The only reason it could be detected at all was because the cradle had awakened and the space around the solar system had become unnaturally quiet. The background noise of the universe, normally a chaotic hiss of cosmic rays and ancient photons, had thinned so much that even a whisper of structure became visible. And the silhouette was not a whisper. Its edges were fractal, recursive, almost architectural. Too ordered for a nebula, too straight for a dust cloud, too still for a debris field. Someone in Umbra whispered, "It's another cradle." But another voice, older, tired, murmured, "No, it's bigger." The geometry was unmistakable. This was the same design philosophy as the cradle now orbiting the sun. Ribbed arcs, nested spirals, concentric shells of engineered space. But the scale? Even at this distance, the silhouette dwarfed the cradle by orders of magnitude. The cradle could fit inside one of its smallest arcs. It wasn't a sibling, it was a parent, or worse, a collector. The returning resonance, the first signal that had answered the cradle, now grew louder, clearer, as if the silhouette were directing it. The cradle responded in kind. Its nodes flared in synchronized waves. Its halo expanded, its blue-white core brightened until its light projected faintly onto the distortion shell surrounding it. The two structures, one near the sun, one in the void, began harmonizing. Not communicating, not transmitting, harmonizing. Their pulses matched, their rhythms aligned, their gravitational oscillations drifted toward unity. The solar system was no longer isolated. It was part of a circuit, a link in a network that stretched far beyond human understanding. The researchers stared at the harmonic graphs, watching the pulses climb towards synchronization 1 percentage point at a time. 91%, 93%, 94%. Every increase amplified the tension in the room. What happens at 100%? No one asked aloud. Because another phenomenon appeared, this time closer to home. Earth's magnetosphere rippled again, not the faint tremors from earlier. A full, sweeping bow shock as though something had brushed against the very skin of the planet. Satellites jittered in orbit, their stabilizers whirring to correct unseen nudges. Marine navigation systems in the Pacific flickered. Birds across multiple continents erupted into sudden flight, as if startled by something humans couldn't hear. And then, once again, golden auroras appeared. But this time they weren't faint. They stretched from pole to pole, shimmering in soft waves that drifted across the atmosphere like the surface of a slowly rolling sea. Their colour matched the cradle's earlier emissions exactly. "What is it doing to Earth?" someone whispered. The truth was worse. The cradle wasn't doing anything to Earth yet. Earth was reacting on its own. It was syncing with the network, as if being tuned, as if being prepared. Then the silhouette moved. Not quickly, not aggressively, but decisively, turning ever so slightly until one of its vast spiraling arcs aligned directly with the sun. This movement alone triggered gravitational ripples detectable across the entire heliosphere. It wasn't approaching, not yet. It was orienting, lining itself up with the cradle, with the sun, with the entire solar system like a giant lens preparing to focus light. Umbra's director muttered, "It's forming a baseline. For what?" Nobody answered, because everyone had the same impossible thought. One. No one wanted to speak. The cradle wasn't the event. The cradle was the ignition, and the silhouette was the machine that answered the ignition. The nodes on the cradle brightened again. The core contracted. The halo thickened. Then the cradle emitted a second beam. This one wasn't focused on the sun. This one wasn't diagnostic. This one wasn't informational. It was directional. Aimed straight at the silhouette. A column of pale blue light stretched across millions of kilometers. Thin, precise, silent. The silhouette responded immediately. Its own geometry lit in faint ripples. Not bright, not intense, but synchronized. The energy exchange between them intensified until space-time itself began to warp, bending the starlight between the two structures like a sheet of fabric pulled at both ends. The harmonic graphs spiked 95%, 96%, 96.4%, 97%. The cradle trembled. A vibration picked up in readings from Mars, Jupiter, even Earth's upper atmosphere. Whatever these structures were doing was not localized. The scientists realized, too late, that the solar system had been woven into the process. Then a new wave of distortions appeared, this time originating from the silhouette itself. Space around it rippled outward like the first tremor before an earthquake. Not destructive, not violent, just initializing. Lines of gravitational shear spread from its arcs, fanning out into interstellar space like the first strokes of a colossal brush. It was shaping the space around it, preparing it, readying it. Someone's voice cracked. This is pre-alignment for a system-scale event. The cradle responded. Its core flared. Its nodes vibrated with identical pulses. The silhouette's massive arcs grew brighter as the network between them tightened. 98%, 98%, 99%. And then, the worst understanding yet dawned. The silhouette wasn't coming to the cradle. It was making the solar system come to it, bit by bit, not with force, not with acceleration, with alignment, a reconfiguration of fields, a reshaping of resonances, a transformation of the heliosphere into part of the machine. At 99.5%, the solar system hummed, a deep universal tone that shook the magnetospheres of every planet. And for the first time, the cradle projected a shape into open space, a symbol, a geometric sigil thousands of kilometers across. It wasn't a command, it wasn't a warning, it was a handshake, a final key, and the silhouette, that ancient massive shape, answered it. Not with light, not with motion, but by revealing its own symbol in return. Two shapes, two structures, two nodes of a forgotten network, both awake, both aligned, both ready. And the solar system, small, fragile, and unprepared, stood between them, waiting for what happens when the alignment reaches 100%. No one in Umbra breathed when the synchronization reached 90.7%. The graphs on the monitors no longer resembled anything human instruments were designed to read. The cradles, harmonics, and the incoming silhouette's vast oscillations were so tightly interwoven that the two signatures had become indistinguishable. It was like trying to separate the voices of two singers whose tones were so perfectly blended that their harmonics fused into a single note. And above all the data, above all the fear, hung a question so heavy that no one dared speak it. What happens at 100%? The answer arrived quietly, not with a flash, not with destruction, not with spectacle, but with a soundless shift in pressure, a sensation that pricked at the back of the skull, a weight that settled behind the eyes, a tightening of space so subtle it felt like a deep breath held by the solar system itself. The silhouette, impossibly large in the outer dark, paused. Its arcs stilled, its internal field stopped fluctuating. The region around it, once trembling with dilation and lensing effects, smoothed into perfect clarity. The cradle responded. Its iris contracted until the blue-white core shone like a singularity of light, wrapped in delicate geometry. Its nodes aligned into crystalline precision. Together, the two structures stopped. Everything stopped. The graphs froze. Solar wind steadied. Planetary harmonics plateaued. Even the sun's chaotic surface calmed, its churning turbulence smoothing into a serene, unnatural order. No system in the known universe should be able to freeze chaos like this. Not entropy, not radiation, not stellar convection. Yet here it was, the solar system holding its breath in perfect silence. At exactly 99.8%, the first rupture appeared. Not an explosion, not a tear, not visual, a disturbance. A micro-shiver in space-time, so faint it took 3 cross-referenced probes to confirm it. A ripple that moved through the void not as energy, but as absence. A subtraction of inertia, a hollowing of the fabric itself. The silhouette answered with a tremor along its outer rings. The cradle echoed. The alignment climbed another fraction. 0.82%. Earth felt it, not in quakes, not in tides, but in consciousness. People across continents reported the same sensation, a momentary awareness of something vast pressing gently against the boundary of perception, not threatening, not speaking, just observing. Some described it as being watched by the sky. Others felt an intrusive stillness in the air. A few fainted without understanding why. Animals sensed it first. Whales changed migratory routes. Birds spiraled upward in strange formations. Dogs whined at empty corners. Bees froze mid-flight. Something was touching the magnetic fabric of every living thing, testing responses, measuring resilience. Umbra's director whispered, "It's scanning biology." A tremor passed through the room. They had assumed the cradle and the silhouette were only interacting with cosmic fields. Gravity, magnetism, solar wind, space-time curvature. But this was intimate. This was invasive. The cradle pulsed softly, a wave of light smoothing across its ribs. The silhouette answered with a deep, slow oscillation that bent starlight hundreds of kilometers around its arcs. Alignment reached 99.9%. A tone filled the data streams, not audible in air, but unmistakable in the readings. A harmonic so low, so fundamental, it vibrated through matter itself. Cables trembled. Metal frames hummed. The very building shuddered. Some instinct deep in the brain recognized it. A tone older than language, older than fear. The tone of something waking from an age-long sleep. The cradle responded. Its core flared, illuminating the dark void around it like a lantern lighting a cavern. The nodes hummed. The rings tightened. Another ripple of space tone cascaded outward. 99.92%. And then the silhouette moved again. Its arcs rotated outward, widening into a vast open structure, like a colossal flower unfurling. Each rotation distorted gravity, sending waves across the heliosphere. Earth's atmosphere vibrated. Jupiter's magnetosphere arced into a bow shock. Neptune's rings trembled, and all the while, the silhouette opened wider, revealing something behind it. A darkness, not the darkness of empty space, a structured darkness, a void within a void. A region so perfectly black that it swallowed all background radiation, microwave, infrared, everything. A hole not of gravity, but of lightlessness, as though photons were being denied entry. Umbra stared at the feeds, terrified. One scientist whispered, "That's not a shadow. That's a chamber." Another replied, "A chamber for what?" The silhouette expanded further, revealing the chamber's inner boundary. A shimmering lattice of geometry so delicate it looked like frost forming on glass. But this frost was kilometers thick, a wall of pattern, a membrane, a veil. The cradle pulsed again, and the membrane reacted, shivering like a surface touched by wind. Something inside it stirred. The alignment ticked upward. 99.93%. The cradle suddenly reoriented, its entire mass tilting until the core pointed directly through the sun toward the silhouette. The sun responded instantly. Its corona tightened. Magnetic arcs narrowed. Its rotation sped by 1/10,000th of a degree. The solar system was being reshaped into a single, coherent instrument. Umbra's lead analyst finally broke. "This isn't communication. This is assembly." The phrase settled like dust. Assembly, not of machines, not of structures, but of roles. The cradle was the ignition. The silhouette was the vessel. The chamber was something else. A receiving cell, a portal, a womb. Nobody dared expand on the thought. The seed star inside the cradle pulsed once. A heartbeat of blue-white light. The silhouette answered with a deep harmonic rumble that bent space-time for millions of kilometers. The membrane of the chamber rippled. 99 to 94%. Then Earth changed again. A subtle shift ran through its magnetic poles. A tilt, almost unmeasurable, toward a new alignment with the cradle. Global atmospheric pressure dropped by 0.5%. The ionosphere thinned. The geomagnetic bow shock shrank. Earth was being drawn into the pattern, not physically, but energetically, as if its magnetic skeleton were being rethreaded to fit a larger design. People felt it. A moment of quiet disorientation, a sense of spatial imbalance, head pressure, ringing ears. It passed quickly, but it passed everywhere. One scientist turned pale, its sinking consciousness. No one contradicted him, because deep in the core of the cradle something shifted, a pattern of light rising like the strands of a helix. The core wasn't merely a star, it was information, encoded, structured, alive. It rippled with sequences, not random, not chaotic, but recursive. A fractal of memory and purpose. The silhouette's chamber flared, a faint pulse of soft white light. The alignment jumped, 99.95%. Umbra's director swallowed hard. It's almost ready. But ready for what? The cradle vibrated, a frequency so deep it shook dust loose from the ceilings. The silhouette answered, warping starlight until the cosmos behind it twisted like molten glass, and then the chamber opened, not by peeling back, not by breaking, by releasing darkness, as though the void behind its lattice had been held under tension for millennia. It poured outward silently, smoothly, like ink dispersing in water. The void wasn't emptiness, it was presence, a presence older than the structures, older than stars, a presence without light or form, only intention. The cradle's nodes flared in response, encircling the core in shifting spirals of blue and white. The alignment climbed again, 99.96%. The void expanded, not toward the solar system, not as aggression, as invitation. The cradle rotated, its ribs sliding into new positions, forming a shape reminiscent of an open gate. The silhouette answered by expanding its arcs wider, creating a frame around the chamber. The structures weren't activating, they were aligning, not to transform the solar system, but to open something through it, a conduit, a passage, a pathway. One astrobiologist whispered, voice shaking, "They're not coming here. They're bringing something through." Nobody breathed. The membrane inside the silhouette's chamber shimmered, revealing flickers of geometry too fast to comprehend, symbols or structures shifting through dimensions like reflections in warped glass. The cradle's core brightened. The alignment jumped, 99.97%. The solar system trembled, planets shifted in their orbits by millimeters, moons vibrated, magnetospheres rang with harmonic tones. Everything was preparing. The cradle pulsed again. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. The void inside the chamber answered with a deep, resonant echo. 2 heartbeats, 2 rhythms, 2 systems aligning. The alignment surged, 99.98%. The chamber expanded, the membrane dilated into a perfect circle, an absence of everything, ringed by latticework geometry. It resembled an event horizon. But it wasn't gravity. It was something else, a boundary between states, a doorway between dimensions. The cradle's core extended tendrils of light toward the membrane. The silhouette responded by focusing gravitational lensing into narrow streams, funneling space-time into alignment. And in the heart of the chamber something shimmered, a shape, small, unclear, moving like a shadow underwater. It grew clearer for an instant, but the alignment wavered. 99 to 82%, 99.98%. A tiny dip, barely perceptible, but enough to jolt the cradle. Its core flickered, its nodes trembled. A harmonic misalignment flared across the solar system. For an instant, the sun flared unnaturally bright. Earth's field spasmed. Jupiter's storm surged. But the silhouette stabilized the alignment instantly. The chamber pulsed. The void inhaled. The cradle answered. The alignment surged again. 99.9%. Umbra's director whispered, "One more cycle, and it reaches 100%. The cradle's core expanded, filling its entire interior with a blinding lattice of blue-white light. The silhouette's chamber deepened, revealing fractal depth stretching far beyond normal space. The void shape inside moved closer, 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 until its form resolved. It wasn't a creature, it wasn't a machine, it was a pattern, A living pattern, a structured consciousness woven from geometry, light, and intention. Vast, ancient, coiled in dimensions humanity has no names for. The cradle's core reached resonance, the silhouette's chamber opened fully, the void being touched the membrane, the alignment hit 100%, space folded, reality trembled, the solar system awakened, everything went white.